You saw on the blackboard down below that we'd billed the evening as the Australia's national disgrace. There's a very strong argument that every elected member of Parliament currently sitting in Canberra should feel ashamed about the fact that since the 2006 census, when the figure was about 105,000 homeless people in Australia, it hasn't got better, it's got worse. Much, much worse. And the political parties on both sides of the major equation in Australia's political continuum have not done anything to address this problem. Yes, there's been money thrown at the issue from Canberra, and yes, there is a homelessness bill currently going through the federal parliament. But the very first draft of that bill made it clear that there was not going to be any legally enforceable rights created by that bill if ever it became an act. That of itself is yet another disgrace. So it's for that reason that the committee deemed that it was important to spend an evening talking about homelessness. And I can't think of three better people to provide us with that insight than Sister Anne Jordan, Gary Moore and Graham Akehurst. They are three people who, by virtue of their life path, their professional work and their commitment to this issue from three very diverse perspectives, that they are, in my view, the best resident experts to talk about this topic. Gary's been a Director of Community Services at Marrickville Council, and he's been CEO of NCOS. NCOS is the New South Wales Council of Social Service. He is a Sydney Leadership graduate and has also, since 2006, been a Director of the Benevolent Society. Gary brings extensive experience in social policy, human services and not-for-profit leadership to all the organisations and causes with which he's been associated as a leader and as an active member. Sister Anne Jordan is the coordinator of Cana Communities, an organisation working largely with people who have become homeless through mental illness and addiction. A key part of Cana's vision, and one that I think is worthy of celebration right around the world, is that everyone's life deserves to be celebrated. And in her work every day, Sister Anne markets and actively promotes that wonderful vision with great success and with magnificent social outcomes. Sister Anne has appeared on ABC and she's described Cana's mission as helping people with the least options, including former prisoners transitioning to life outside of prison and newly settled refugees. From modest beginnings in 1975, Cana now has 5 homes, 3 shelters, a farm, and is supported by more than 700 volunteers. One of Cana's programs won the 2013 Association for Tertiary Education Management Award for Community Engagement. There is a short video clip which I'd love to have shared with you, but I don't think we have the technology to do that this evening. But it's a profoundly inspiring video clip which many of us who have seen it once go back and we revisit it many times because it inspires us and reminds us that anything is possible. Graham Akehurst is an authority also on the subject of homelessness. His qualification and credentials are of the most important order in that he is able to directly and personally share with us the insight of the situation of being homeless and the situation of being at risk of homelessness. All three of our wonderful speakers this evening have also spoken this year on numerous occasions at our WEA program on human rights and social justice and have shared with us their unique insights. Please join me in welcoming all three of our speakers this evening to Politics in the Pub.
2011 census, 29,000 people officially counted as homeless in New South Wales, and in 2012-13 the homelessness services system operates across the state. 52,000 people sought assistance with accommodation and support. The City of Sydney, since 2010, in summer and winter, does a street count, looking at street homeless people. The figures, whilst thankfully went down a little bit from 2010 to 2012, which corresponded with some of the one-off government spending that Howard mentioned in his introduction, since 2012 have been on the increase. And so they now count, in terms of street homeless people in the City of Sydney area, a 16% increase from August 2013 to August 2014, and over the summer count they did earlier this year in February, a 26% increase. We know that about 50% of people that receive Commonwealth rent assistance in New South Wales who live in the private rental sector are paying much more than 30% of their income on rental housing costs. So as a proxy for sort of risk of homelessness potential, it's quite significant. But something like 30% are paying 50% or more of their disposable income in rental housing costs. And of course most of that is in Sydney, but not exclusively. And just to sort of add to a bit of the picture, every year Anglicare in April each year does a rental snapshot of what's happening in terms of private rental properties which are advertised. In this year's one, in April this year, over 2 Saturdays, where they looked at 12,500 properties, 30 of the 12,500 properties in Greater Sydney and the Illawarra were affordable for people on fixed incomes and 800 for people earning the minimum wage. So you kind of get a sense about the sort of scale of the difficulties in the housing market for people on low and modest incomes. In terms of the causes of homelessness, I just want to dwell on two things. One is about a set of structural factors, and by that I mean things such as the lack of supply of social or affordable housing, and also the loss of employment, and increasingly importantly, underemployment in the economy and in the labour market in general. And then there's a whole range of social factors which I know we'll talk a bit more about tonight, but things such as family breakdown, domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, mental health issues, alcohol and drug issues, and instances of engagement with the justice system. So when you think about homelessness, it's really important to think about there are lots of causes, economic and structural causes and personal and social causes. So therefore thinking about how to do something meaningful and long-term about reducing homelessness really means tackling all of those things, not just tackling bits and pieces of them. And I guess when I come back to talk a bit later on, I'll talk a bit about what that might mean in terms of a package, particularly with the state election coming up in March next year. Can I say that one of the other things that's really important to appreciate about homelessness is that whilst people who sleep rough on the streets are doing it incredibly tough, they are 7% of the total. The biggest group of homeless people in New South Wales, 30% of them in fact, are people that are families squeezed into marginal private rental housing, mainly in Western Sydney, and many of them migrants. And when we're talking about overcrowding, we're talking about housing where you need 4 additional bedrooms to have a reasonable standard of living. 17% of the homeless live in boarding houses, about 20% are in the homelessness service system at any one time, and the next biggest group are people who couch surf. So generally as a community, I think we have a view, and in the public arena, that homelessness is about people on the street. Yes, that's very true, but there's many more people who are homeless beyond that in very different circumstances, and that's why when we think about things to actually do that would make a difference, we have to think about diverse strategies about how to deal with it. Anyhow, look, I just wanted to do that at the beginning to introduce some of the facts and figures, if you like, and I'll come back in a little while, so thanks.
Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and I too would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land and the elders past and present. I love the way that Howard, who knows many things about me, including the good and the bad, he works with me quite often and quite regularly, deals with the stuff that I get right and the stuff that I get wrong. But I love that he picked on and chose to speak of celebration of each one of us, that every person is worth celebrating. And how we remember that and how we do that for ourselves and for each other is at the heart of what makes our world better. If we can hold and come back to and believe in ourselves that we are loved and celebrated, then we can do whatever it is that makes our life worthwhile, what we believe is important for our world. Homeless people are not different. Homeless people are not a different group of people who have different needs or different belief systems. So if we're hoping to take advantage of an opportunity we have for employment, for education, for change in whatever way it is, change from addiction, change from being on the streets, change from what we know is familiar, we're going to do it better if somebody likes me, if somebody believes in me and helps me know that I can be celebrated. So in looking at the issue of homelessness, and I have lived in, Candy Communities has been in operation since 1975, and I came in 1986, so I've lived in the community since 1986, and I have met many people who have suffered and struggled with all sorts of aspects of social aspects of what creates homelessness, with poverty, with illness, with the sorts of things that create homelessness. As Gary was mentioning, there's personal history, there's crisis in our lives, there's social disadvantage. You know, I know people who've never lived in a house where somebody went to work. So when I talk about, let's see about what you'd like to get as a job, you know, why would they? There's something more that's needed. And how do we create the community that has them believe that's a really good thing for them to do? In Cana, we create community. That's our major goal, is to create community through a relational model. And we look at whatever it is that we can do. So we've done cafes, we do housing, we do shelters, we do a range of things. We have a farm now, and that's where the video link that Howard was talking about was created through the farm and our partnership with TAFE. What we've come to recognise is that East is our word. You know, the wise people followed the star and found the saviour. So East was a great word for us, because it also could be an acronym for education and employment, accommodation, spirituality and transition. So those 4 aspects became the components of what we can try and companion people to tap into. Clearly we're never going to do all four in one go. But it gives the range of things that people might be able to look at and say, how might I make a change in any one of these aspects of my life? And we do it through housing, we do it through meals, we do it through prayer times, we do it through meditation, we do it through yoga, we do it through weekends away, we do it through whatever we can be creative enough and whatever our volunteers can be, can believe in and want to do with people, so that we feel better about ourselves. Because then we are likely to take the next step for change. So I guess what I would like to just share with you on the homelessness picture. Because I've lived in a convent for many years, I came to live in a mixed household when I moved to Paris in 1986. And I recognised very clearly that when the leadership of the house was male, there were many women there. When the leadership was women, there were many men there. And it just became so blatantly obvious. It was very easy to say mixed housing is a better move than single-sex housing, because women respond better when there's men around and men respond better when there's women around. It's as basic as that. And we become our best selves because we want to shine in the eyes of the other. And that's how it is, that's how we're made. We're made to be social beings, and we're also made to want to achieve. In reading Hugh Mackay's book on belonging, he talks about that tension between the need for us to achieve something and the need for us to belong, and how they hold a tension for us. Because when we want to belong, we've actually got to think about what happens for the other. When we want to achieve, we have to think about how do I get what it is that I'm dreaming for, what it is that I'm longing for in my life, or what I think is going to make our world better. And we go for that with a passion, with a conviction, and with a single-mindedness that doesn't allow the other. So we have to hold both of those things if we're going to be reasonable human beings. But we also have to have a drive if we're going to achieve a change in the position of homelessness. We have to be able to say, I really want that and I'll go for it. And if you're getting in my way, I'll go around you, or I'll go over you, or I'll go under you, or I'll get whatever I want, because it really matters to me. And when you love someone who is suffering, you will do what it takes. That's why I believe that whether it's homeless people who are homeless at this time, or people who are coming out of prison, or people who have mental health issues, people who are in crisis, when we meet people and know them, we have a different way of responding to an issue. So, invitation to join us for a meal. But that's quite serious as well as being quite flippant. Most of you haven't got that space in your life, and I understand that. I get it. But it's also true that many of you, in fact most families, have somebody who is connected in our family who is homeless, or who chooses to be homeless, or who can't manage today, and therefore don't want to have anything to do with the rest of us, and so we've lost touch with them and we don't know where they are. I have that, and I'm sure many of you have that. And I look after the people who come into my life in the hope that somebody else that my nephews can cope with will be looking after them in the same way as I'm looking after someone else's nephews. And that's what helps to make our world better. It doesn't take away the pain, it doesn't take away the anxiety you have for people you love, but it helps know that somewhere something is being done. There are people who are homeless. Let me tell you, the people coming out of prison, people coming from prison have enormous difficulty finding somewhere to live. If you add to that you have an offence against a child, think where you might live. Think where you might get your life together again with $200. That's what you get when you get out of prison. You get $200. You can't even buy a week's rent in Sydney for $200, let alone get clothes or get food or get anything. Now that's quite apart from whatever your offence was. That's not just... But if you think about what social stigma there is, what economic stigma there is, what relational stigma there is for people in that situation coming from prison, many people do not have family they can go back to or friends they can go back to, because their friendship circle has been the circle that got them where they were. So if they want to start again, then how do they link to a community? And I can tell you, this is the part of the social connection for homelessness, the understanding of how we get to be relational with each other. I rest my point of, go back to the point of, we make our best choices if somebody believes in us. If you know nobody who believes in you, and you can't go back near the people you thought did once, how do we get that? How do we have an awareness in our communities, in our church communities, in our politics in the pub community, in our community that's about Lions Club, bushwalking clubs, social clubs, anything that we have, how do we get a way of welcoming somebody who comes from social disadvantage? Because that's the way they will be able to make their life different. How do we have the awareness, where do we put ourselves in the position to say, I will meet somebody, and between us, as a group, we will be able to, the 6 of us can actually visit somebody and find a way to make this one person have a different life, not be homeless. We can work out how to help them do whatever it takes. And I can tell you, it is possible. And it does happen because people do that. It happens in many ways, and I know many people who have done that. And it takes years, but you've got to hang in for the long haul, like you do with your children, with your family, with your partner, with whoever it is. We hang in because we love them. And if people have got no loved space to hang in with, particularly if it's come from a long history of disadvantage or of lack of resources, poverty, social isolation or illness are the key things that I know of with many people. I could give you stories of many people in any of those aspects. But I'll just give you Graham, because Graham is a man who's been part of our community for many years, and he can speak of what his story is and of what's been helpful with Cana for him. Graham.
I've been homeless. I was married for 14 years and my wife died. The children went back to New Zealand, so I was left on my own. I went off the rails a bit. I didn't get into drugs as such, but I was smoking a bit of pot, drinking a bit. And then I thought, no, this is no good. I've got to do something about this. So I got a job truck driving. I've been a truckie most of my life. And started doing the interstate bit. So you're on your own. You have nobody. And then I came to Sydney a few years ago. About 25 years ago. And about that. And I was living on the street because I had nobody that I knew. I was just living in a park, had a sleeping bag, that was good. Didn't have much money because I wasn't on the benefit. So what I had to dole out just for a little bit of food, and I'm a smoker, so yeah. But I was picking up butts as well. And somebody said to me one day, let's go to Cana for lunch. Yeah, never heard of Cana, but we'll go. So we went to Cana for lunch. I met Sister Anne there. And then one of the volunteers had asked me, why don't you come up to Redfern tonight? We have a meal up there. I said, yeah, all right. So I went up to Redfern and met Father Brian Stoney, who's sadly passed away. And then somebody asked me if I could do things, like put curtain rods up and things like that. And I'm quite handy with my hands, so I did that. And I felt I was giving back to the community. That they were helping me with food and not accommodation, but food. And I did stay at one of the houses, one part of it, 2 houses. And I felt like I was with a family again. That's what Cana means to me, is a family. So, and they helped me out. I helped them doing odd bits of maintenance and stuff like that. And I had no car at the time. And then an opportunity come up to get a car, and Anne, through Cana, financed me to get this car so I could get a job and better my life. Because if you haven't got transport and you haven't got an address, you can't get a job. Nobody will hire you. So that's how I think Cana's helped me a lot that way.
I just want to tell you that today, when I went to Nagle House, which is our women's house, Graham was there and had spent most of the morning. We've got a landlord who is very lovely on a whole lot of ranges, but doesn't fix things. And Graham was there undoing the screws and the bolts to get the loo flushing again. And this is his second attempt at it, because he had a go at it. It's really old and it's in a place in a way that makes it really hard to fix because the house is very old. But he's there undoing and working for quite a long time on rusty nuts that won't come off the screw, and rusty bolts and things that will come out. And that's the sort of stuff that he does for us, that helps us know he belongs, but helps him to know he belongs, but helps us to just be able to have things done that we would otherwise be paying a fortune for, or we'd have to move out of the house because the landlord won't do it. But I want to ask Graham one other thing around the social connection. I have a very special memory of a time when a friend of ours, Pat Bishop, we were off the house out near Mudgee at Mona Bay, and Tongbong was the caretaker's cottage that we were given for a time while it worked for the owner. So we had this house that was just vacant and had been for some time. And Pat was moving out there because he was someone who thought he would be able to run a house that helped people come from the city or establish in Mudgee and create a little community space that gave country and farm time. Well, there was lots to do, but we were having an opening. So 80 of us from the city were coming out to the opening. So we had to stay there, so we had to sleep in the shed, and we had to have space, and we had to have a fire, it was winter, and all of those things. And Pat was a little nervous about us coming, a little nervous. By the time we got there, Graham and Steve had all the firewood there, they had the gate fixed, all the plumbing working, the whole range of things. The lawns made, the clothesline taken out because it was not going to help. And all of those things that would make Pat feel good to be able to welcome us. Like, I just remember, because Pat was my friend, and I know how stressed he was. Helping and belonging are so integral to what goes on in our lives.
People do have crises. Everybody has them. And to be celebrated in the way Cana celebrates people, they don't criticise. They don't because your religion's wrong. It's basically Catholic, anti-Catholic, but that doesn't matter. It's personal. And I feel that's part of what made me better, was belonging to that community, was being part of that community, being a family. That's what it is to me. And I know all the Anne's brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, because I've been part of that community. It's been great. It's one big family.
And I'd just like to say a little bit about some of the, I guess, broader policy issues concerning what we might do to prevent and reduce homelessness. If you look across the road here at that block of apartments, the City of Sydney have managed to negotiate about 4% of them being affordable housing. Right across Sydney, where new housing is being built close to jobs and close to services and close to transport, we should be ensuring that a percentage of all of this stock is affordable for low-income people. They do it in New York, they do it in London, they do it in just about every other OECD country, and they do it in 30 of the 50 American states. We don't do it in New South Wales. We seem to believe that it's all a question of releasing more land for housing supply and let the market fix it. Well, I'm sorry, as most of us in this room know, that's a fallacy. It won't happen, it's not happening. And of course the dire circumstances we have about housing costs and housing inequality in New South Wales and in many other parts of Australia is testimony to the folly of that approach. So one of the first things, and it's within the state government's power to do, is to require that developments like this across the road or anywhere, whether they're urban infill or development on the fringes, has a quota of affordable housing. And you can do it through two ways. Two main ways that happen. One is something called inclusionary zoning, which allows local government as the planning authority to say there should be 5 or 10% of that stock is affordable. Or you do it through value capture, which forces the developer to have to actually pay the money in terms of the improved value and sale that they're getting off that. That's what happens in most of the OECD. It does not happen in Australia, and particularly not in New South Wales. So that's one of the things immediately that we should be lobbying for very strongly, because that also goes to the point about trying to have a social mix, retaining a social mix in this city, which is fast becoming an income apartheid arrangement in terms of where you live and where you in fact can't afford to live anymore. I guess the second area, focusing on the supply of housing as one of the causes of increasing homelessness, or the lack of supply. For several years now, we all know that investment in social housing has been on the decline. Both levels of government and both political parties have been equally to blame in this. Certainly the Rudd government, as part of the global financial crisis, did spend money as part of that it did in fact fund 6,000 new social housing properties in New South Wales. It's the only time we've had growth in 20 years. Only time. And so we do unfortunately have a housing department, or Housing New South Wales, or Land and Housing Corporation in this state, that is essentially a financial basket case. It's that because a mixture of things like a lot of this older housing stock is reaching its use-by date, because public housing has become welfare housing only for the most needy. The rental stream that comes out of that doesn't pay for the maintenance costs. and of course governments have stopped investing in it. So we have a crisis in social housing. We need to be thinking about social housing as important infrastructure, as public transport, certainly as roads, certainly as airports. And we need to make an investment in that. So a second area, once again, which state governments do have some control over, is where they spend their infrastructure money. I guess coming then to things like some of the social and personal issues and pressures. One of the things that happens in New South Wales and happens elsewhere, unfortunately, is that if you leave a mental health facility, if you leave a prison, or if you leave an out-of-home care situation of a young person, there's no requirement on the care provider to not exit you into homelessness. And I think, as Historian's already said, we have lots of examples of people who live in custody in New South Wales who end up knocking on the doors or being dumped quite often, 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon at a homelessness shelter, who've been exited out of a correctional facility. New South Wales Health does the same thing in terms of acute mental health facilities. We don't have a guaranteed exit planning, a case planning system that requires practitioners in our field to have to find people suitable accommodation before they're exited from care. So one of the things we should be insisting of the state government is all of the agencies that run institutional care or that fund institutional care of various sorts should make sure they don't exit clients into homelessness. It's as simple as that. So that once again well within the powers of the state government to do. One of the other big areas which we're starting to see some movement in, but which we've got so far to go, is once again, if you think back about the causes in terms of family breakdown, domestic violence, mental health issues, you start to think about our lack of investment in prevention and early intervention generally. The reality is that if we get better at early childhood education, and if we get better at sort of family support, and we get better at identifying risk and dealing with it, we won't have nearly as many people ending up in the homelessness service system or in the crisis system. And that means shifting budgets. It means spending money in the areas that are about prevention and not always at the acute end of the system. And that involves not just the little homelessness service system, but New South Wales Health, but educational communities, but children's services run in whichever sector. So there are a lot of things that we could do that can take the pressure off the causes of homelessness if we chose to do it. If we had the political will to do it, and we know how to do it, it's a question of will in terms of doing that. And the final thing I just wanted to mention is that we have a lot of discussion going on at the moment about new ways of funding things. Governments are broke, budget surpluses are, we've got to get back to, etc., etc. Well, there are some interesting ways, and I guess they've been around for a while, but we don't seem to have broken through the ceiling. One of them is, of course, about how we convince the trustees and super funds to spend some money on infrastructure in these sorts of areas. You can still get a pretty good return on investment if you structure it right, but it just means all of us sitting here who are super fund members being prepared to take 0.0001% less return on our super returns each year. I'm sure for the question of the common good, and also for the question of reducing costs and taxes in the longer term, perhaps we could do that. We're seeing new things like social impact bonds being to finance preventative efforts in the early childhood area at the moment. Once again, in other countries, we're getting private investors to invest in schemes in the homelessness area, which are designed to put people into housing with support and therefore reduce the cost long term of emergency department admissions, prison admissions, all of that. And guess what? Governments pay the investors the return on their investment because they're making huge savings. There are some smart and innovative ways to think about addressing these sorts of issues, but I guess what I'd like to finish on is to simply say, or to reinforce that we know what we need to do. It is a question about will, and it's a question about being thorough and comprehensive. And I guess, a little plug, I would urge people in thinking about the state election in March next year to go and talk to the local candidates or local members or whoever about what they're going to do to attack the causes of homelessness. Causes of homelessness. What are they going to put pressure and debate in their political parties about doing in relation to that? Thank you.
It's so profoundly inspiring to have such a life-saving topic dealt with so comprehensively by three experts on the topic. Three people who are able to bring their heart, soul and spirit to the problem of homelessness and the spectrum of actions available to address and improve the social justice disgrace that we're currently seeing across Australia. And normally I'd wait until the end, but could I just ask you to join me in thanking Sister Anne, Gary and Graham for their presentations during the first half of the meeting.